Well, good morning, Eastern Hills. So good to see you guys. My name's Dustin, and we are in the middle of a series called One Another. This is actually the last week of the series, and I get to talk about what it looks like today for us to encourage one another. We've talked about what it means to love and serve and accept one another here in community as Christians together. And if you're watching today and you feel like you could use some encouragement, you came to the right message. So I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to get started. Jesus, thank you so much for everything you've given us and all the people in this room who have come here to learn from you and all the people watching online who have tuned in today to be a part of this community. We're so grateful for all the ways we're still able to connect even in this crazy season. Pray that you'd give me the words to say and help us grow together as a community. We love you. Amen. So, 2020 has been a little dicey, I think that's fair to say. I don't know about you, but maybe you lost a job or lost an opportunity, or you missed out on a trip you were planning, or you just haven't been able to see family that you get to see normally all the time. If you're younger, maybe you missed out on school and friends and people you like to hang out with, and you're still not totally sure what's going to happen this fall, if you're going to get to go back to college or go back to school. And so it's kind of a wild season, and I just thought I would start off our talk today about encouragement with some encouragement for you. So, hey, here's my encouragement for 2020. It's going to get better. It's going to be, in fact, you know what? I think it's actually going to be a lot better. I think the last half of 2020 is going to be so much better than the first half of 2020 that most of us are going to say that was the best year of my life. I think it's going to be so good that it is just going to blow us away, that we're not going to be prepared for it. And then by the end of the year, we're going to be like, why did we even worry toward the beginning? Did that help? Do you guys feel encouraged by that? Did that? No? Oh, not as much? I think a lot of the time when we think of encouragement, we know someone's in a hard spot, we know someone's disappointed by something, and we want to help them. But most of the time, I think our encouragement comes off something a little bit like that. Like, hey, it's going to be all right. Like, cheer up, move forward. It's going to be okay. Like, everything's going to work out. And the problem with that, which you just saw in the way I encouraged you about 2020, is that we don't actually know if that's true or not. So we can encourage someone and say, 2020 is going to get better, and if you believe me and you put your hope in that, you might actually be more disappointed at the end of the year, I would guess, than if it just kind of played out normally. And so what we're going to talk about today is this. Real encouragement requires real hope. Real encouragement requires real hope. If we want to actually encourage people in a way that is meaningful and substantial for them, we need to connect it to hope that they can actually put their faith in, that's actually true, and that will happen, and not something that is almost certainly going to disappoint them. And so there's two different kinds of encouragement I want to talk about today, and the first one is reactive encouragement. Reactive encouragement. What do we do when we have a friend or someone in our life that we know who's in a difficult spot, they're feeling pain, they're feeling disappointment, they're feeling fear, and we want to help pick them up and help move them forward in their life? How do we encourage out of that reaction to someone else's pain? And we're going to look at a passage in the New Testament that I think is going to be very helpful for that. But before we get there, we asked a question before the service started. What's your favorite unhealthy snack? And I'd love to just talk about some of these answers. First one I've got is on Church Online. Amanda said, a spoonful of cookie dough out of the tub. That sounds amazing. I love cookie dough. Can't go wrong. Kennedy said, popcorn with M&Ms in it. It's a little bit extra, but I see where you're going. You know, it's just fine. Sean said, air-fried French fries. Whew, that's a tongue twister. Try it. Just try saying it right now. Air-fried French fries. It's good, but come on. I want deep-fried French fries. Rachel said gummy bears. That's good. Gummy bears are a good go-to. That was on Facebook. And the movie theater treats, super on board for that. One of my favorite unhealthy snacks is actually cotton candy. And I brought some. It's kind of deflated a little bit, you can see. I brought some cotton candy. It's one of my favorites. If you're at the fair or you're going to a theme park and you want to get a little snack, cotton candy is a go-to. Someone out there is thinking, what about elephant ears? What about caramel popcorn? Go away. It's cotton candy. That's what we want. And the thing about cotton candy is while it's really delicious, there's not a lot of substance to it. And I think a lot of times when we encourage people with kind of shallow, hey, it's going to be all right, don't worry, it'll get better, encouragement, it's kind of like giving cotton candy to someone that's starving. It's probably not going to help, and it might even make it worse. And if we want encouragement that's actually going to be helpful, we're going to have to change a little bit of how we think about it. And so here's kind of some examples of some of the cotton candy encouragement that we kind of give people pretty regularly. Someone comes to you, man, it's been so hard for me to find a job. I just cannot figure out how this is going to work. Like I've been applying at all these places. I know I'm qualified. I know I can do this, and nobody is giving me a chance. And we come back with the cotton candy that says, hey, you're going to have a perfect job. You're going to find a great place to work. Everything's going to work out. You're going to have a great boss, and you're going to love it. The problem, we don't actually know. And the thing that just disappointed someone, we're actually just pointing them back to the same thing. We're spinning them around in a circle and saying, hey, just keep on doing the same thing you're doing right now. I'm sure next time it won't disappoint you. But what if they don't find a job next week? What if they don't find a job next month? What if they find a job they don't like? Or someone comes to you and they say, it's just so frustrating. I thought I was going to get into this college and it didn't happen, and now I don't know what I'm going to do. And you say, oh, don't worry. You're going to find great friends. You're going to have people in your life that are just going to surround you, and whatever school you end up with is going to be so perfect for you. Maybe, maybe not. And as Christians, if you're in the room and you're watching and you're kind of new or just checking things out, there's this thing that Christians do where they sort of sprinkle Jesus on top of a normal thing. So we do this as well as Christians. We'll say, hey, God has a plan for you. It's going to be okay. I know you guys have been trying to get pregnant and you're having a hard time with that, but listen, God's just preparing you for the time when he is going to bring you the perfect kid and your family's going to be great. Maybe. I know finances have been tough for you guys and you've been struggling with them, but I think God is going to bless you in the future. It's a hard season right now, but don't worry, you're going to get there. Maybe. And the problem is that we encourage people to put their hope in things that may actually just disappoint them again. And if we want to change the way that we encourage people, we have to change the hope that we're connecting that encouragement to. So we're going to read a passage from a guy named Paul, who is a New Testament writer. If you've been listening to this series up to this point, Phil has been talking about Paul's letter to the Romans. And this is 1 Thessalonians, so it's a different group of people, but they're also having some issues. And so we're going to read the passage, and I'll kind of explain what they're going through. But I think it's going to be very helpful for us as we think about what it looks like to encourage one another. By reading and seeing what he has to say. So here's what it is. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep. So their fear is that people who have died aren't going to get to go to heaven, which you're like, that doesn't make sense. We think if you're a Christian in here, you think if you die, you go to heaven. That's how it works. But they had some confusion about this, and I'll explain more in a second, but they weren't sure what was going to happen to their friends that were passing away. He says that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. So basically, if you're in the room and you're a Christian, I'm just going to give you a little rundown. If you're not a Christian or if you're not sure about this or you're just checking it all out, this is kind of some basic stuff that helps us understand what's going on in this passage. We believe that Jesus died on the cross, lived a perfect life with no sin, died on the cross for us to bring us into his family and let us have a connection with God now and for eternity, and that someday he is going to come back from heaven, and when he does, he's going to change the world and make it new and bring a new heavens and new earth that we're all going to live with God forever, okay? Basic Christian stuff. But because it was so early in the history of the church, they didn't really understand how Jesus coming back was going to work. So they had this fear because they thought Jesus was going to come back in like a month or two. They're like, oh, he just left, he'll be right back. But it had taken longer than that, and some of the people in their church communities had started to pass away, and they were getting concerned because they thought those people wouldn't get to go to heaven when Jesus came back. And on top of that, they were being persecuted, so there were people out there actually trying to kill them, and you can see the tension where if you die for your faith because you're standing up to persecution, then you don't get to go to heaven, which is the reason you had your faith in the first place. It's a little dicey. So Paul is writing to them, and the first thing he does is he says, hey, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. If your friends passed away, they're going to be fine. And then he goes back and encourages them with something else, the gospel. That whole first part of the story, that Jesus died for them, and they have hope in him. And no matter how bad it gets, no matter how difficult their situation is, no matter how hard things are for them, Jesus is going to come back, and when he does, he's going to fix everything. Even if you die, which is pretty much the worst thing we can imagine, right? He is going to resolve that and bring you into a relationship with him forever in heaven. So he lands the passage here, and he says, therefore, encourage one another with these words. So he encourages them, and then he says, keep doing this. And he says, with these words, what's he talking about? The gospel. The same thing he just used to encourage them. The fact that Jesus is with them then, and Jesus is going to be with them forever. And so I think as we are considering what it looks like to encourage one another, this whole idea of encouraging people with the gospel is so key to how we can actually encourage people with hope that doesn't fail them, that doesn't let them down, that Jesus is with them now and forever. Now, it sounds really nice, but you may be thinking, how do I actually do that? So I want to give you a couple of clear ways that you can do that, and I want to start with a story. A couple of years ago, I was going through a pretty difficult rejection. I've spent most of my adult life as a single person. I'm in a relationship now, so don't try and set me up with your friends. It's going to be okay. But I spent most of my adult life, I'm almost 30, as a single person. And I've had lots of people come and encourage me in times when I've been rejected or hurt or lonely, and they say things like, hey, there's more fish in the sea. Hey, it's going to be all right. Don't worry. There's a perfect person out for you. And I've kind of just started to brush it off and move on and not really let it get in my head and not take it seriously. But this particular rejection was painful. And so I was sitting with my friend Colin, who's just an amazing guy, loves Jesus so much. I'm just lucky to have friends like that in my life. And we were sitting in his living room, and I was sharing about this recent rejection. And he listened, and he understood, and he saw where I was coming from. And he kind of leaned back in his chair a little bit. And he said, Dustin, you are putting way too much hope in having a relationship, and you need to move some of that hope over to Jesus, or you are going to keep getting disappointed and crushed like this. And that was pretty hard to hear, because I thought it was super important. But Colin was my good friend, and he'd sat with me in a lot of these moments, and so I trusted him, and I took that back to Jesus. And if our normal encouragement for people is like cotton candy, this was like steamed broccoli, like I was not a fan. But I went back to Jesus, and I talked to him about it, and I spent time working through it. And honestly, that was one of the most significant moments in my life with Jesus, of learning. And similarly, moments like that where I've been disappointed by something and shifted my hope to Jesus have been moments that God has used me and moved in my life in significant ways that he couldn't have otherwise. And so when our friends come to us and we are reacting to them and we know we need to encourage them and we don't know what to say, I think the most helpful thing to remember is that encouraging them with this kind of gospel, refocusing your hope encouragement is the most helpful thing we can do as Christians. And so it can be a little bit tricky to do that, and maybe you have a relationship with people in your life where you can do what Colin did and be very blunt, but I think sometimes that's intimidating, and we want to be sensitive to our friends. So I've got two questions that I think might help reframe our conversations and encourage our friends who need it to think about what Jesus could be doing in their life. And so here's the first question. How do you think Jesus feels about what you're going through? I think a lot of times when we're in a dark place or when we're in a disappointed mode or afraid of the future, we often ignore the fact that Jesus is involved in the present. We forget about the fact that Jesus is doing something in that moment with us. And so by asking, hey, how do you think Jesus feels about that? We invite our friends to bring Jesus into their process and think about what he considered, like what he's thinking about their situation. There's a lot of guilt and shame that happens in those moments, and we want to remind them that Jesus has grace and he's with them now. And then secondly, have you brought this to God? Have you brought this to God? Because I think a lot of times when we are in pain, when we're disappointed, we've put too much hope in something, our automatic response is not to bring it to God. But I think the most helpful thing we can do in those situations is go to God and say, God, I have this thing. I've been putting too much of my hope in this, and I want to change that. I want to move it over to you. I want to put my hope in you and release this thing and trust that whatever you're doing in my life right now is good, and no matter how difficult or painful the situation I'm in right now is, I know that I have a hope in the future and you're with me right now. And that's hard work. But I think the more we can encourage our friends to move in that direction and bring Jesus into their process, the more actual growth and movement forward we'll see, because we're giving them a hope in something that isn't going to fail them. So the second kind of encouragement I want to talk about is a little bit different. I'm going to call it proactive encouragement. What does it look like when things are going well? We talked about how to pick someone up when they're down. How do we move forward together when things are going all right? And we're going to be able to see this in the passage in just a second, actually. But before we get there, I've got another question for you. What is on your bucket list? Go ahead and throw this in the chat or on the app, whatever you're using. What's on your bucket list? What do you want to accomplish, do, experience, see before you leave Earth? And we're going to jump back into the passage, and we'll come back to that question in just a minute. But Paul goes on, and he's just encouraged the people that he's writing to that you guys, hey, don't worry, your friends are going to be okay. Don't forget, Jesus saved you, and he's bringing you into this better life. And then he gets done with that section, and he kind of wraps back into what's going to happen when Jesus comes back. And here's how he says it in the next section. For you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like the thief in the night. The day of the Lord, he's talking about when Jesus comes back and changes everything. It will come like a thief in the night. That's a common metaphor that we don't know when Jesus is going to come back. Nobody knows when God is going to come back. And he says, while people are saying there is peace and security, then suddenly destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. So people are going around like, hey, everything's going good, feels like everything's fine. Then boom, Jesus comes back and everything's different. So obviously probably not this year, but maybe. But what happens here, what we see Paul do here, is he completely changes his tone. He shifts from like, hey guys, it's going to be all right, I'm encouraging you, don't worry, to this urgent feeling of like, this is so important. We have to do something right now. This has to happen now. There is no time to waste because we don't know when Jesus is going to come back. And he lands the section here and he says, therefore, encourage one another. Because of the urgency we have, I want you to keep encouraging one another and build one another up just as you are doing. Build one another up. That's planning for the future. That's building something that's going to accomplish something later on. So far, we're picking people up. Now we want to build people up. How do we do that? The same way, reminding people of the gospel. He says, Jesus is coming back. It's going to happen. He's going to fix everything. And in the meantime, what are we doing with the little bit of time that we have on this world? And I kind of think of it this way. I've got some Legos here, and I don't know if you played with Legos as a kid, but I love them. And I kind of imagine it like you go to your friend and you encourage your friend and you say, hey, it's going to be all right. I see you're going through some pain, but listen, Jesus is your real hope, and I want to help you kind of move to look at him and put your trust in him more. So the next time you don't have to deal with as much disappointment. Or you say, oh, okay, we're going to be proactive. We're going to say, hey, listen, I know nothing really is going on right now, but I see how much time you're spending on that, and I think it's time to maybe shift some of your hope to Jesus. And your friend comes back and encourages you, and you get together in a small group, and you pray, and you encourage one another, and you grow in your faith, and all of a sudden, you're building something bigger and more complicated and stronger than you could have ever done alone. And before you know it, you've made something awesome. This is a Y-wing, by the way. I built it. 9 o'clock clapped. So, thank you. I just want to point out that it shoots lasers. Yeah, so But in all seriousness, when we encourage one another, we grow together and our community changes and we become stronger and more capable together, encouraging one another over time than we ever could have alone. But it takes work. It takes thought. It takes planning. It doesn't just happen automatically. We have to decide beforehand that we want to grow in this direction as a community. And maybe it doesn't feel urgent to you because you're like, hey, I know Jesus is coming back. I believe that. But it's been a while. And so, is it really going to happen soon? Here's the reality. Your life, my life, is fragile. If COVID has shown me anything, it's that we as a human race are quite a bit more fragile than we realize. And whether it's a disease or whether it's getting hit by a bus, your life could end tomorrow. And what are you going to do with the time that you have left on this earth? I asked you earlier what is on your bucket list, and I've got a few of the answers right here. Phil from the app said, I have grandkids that follow Jesus. Love it. That's such a good one. Wayne said, cross-country motorcycle ride. So good. Here's the thing. When it comes to these bucket list things, they require planning. We have to decide beforehand, save up our resources, plan the trip. Ashley said, see the 7 wonders of the world. That's going to take some planning. Vicky said, buy a house with more than I don't really get that one. Oh, but really I'd like to take my kids to Israel. Okay, got it. Got it, I see. Planning trips, going places. For me, one of the things I would love to do is go to Norway. I love traveling. It's on my bucket list. And I think for all of us, there is a deeper kind of spiritual bucket list as well. And for me, as I was thinking about this question and thinking about the urgency of our lives, I realized that for myself, one thing that I really want to see happen is for us to impact our city. For me personally, I feel like I'm called to make a difference in Denver and plant churches in this city that help more and more people have the hope of the gospel that we've been talking about today. And maybe for you, it's something more along the lines of that first answer of, I want to make sure my family knows Jesus and that they follow him and experience life with him and grow into people that are mature in their faith. Maybe you have friends that you care about. I want to be there for the people in my life. I want to be known as someone you can go to and trust. I want to build the people up around me. Maybe you want to help people who need assistance. You would say, I want to help people move from poverty to stability, and you want to be known for that in your life. All of those things take effort and energy and planning. They're not going to happen on accident. And Paul wraps up this section, writing to these people, encouraging them to encourage one another with some very specific commands, some things he wants them to do, some things he wants them to live like. And if you've been following us for the past 3 weeks, some of these are going to sound familiar. But he's saying, just because they're part of the one another's we've been talking about through this whole series. And what Paul's really saying here is that we're aiming towards something. We're not just encouraging one another to make each other feel better. We want to grow together in our faith. We want to become people who are like Jesus. And this is the list that he gives them. He says, we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle. If someone is slacking off, push them forward. Remind them of the gospel, why they're here. Encourage the faint-hearted, pick them up. Help the weak, move people from falling apart, losing faith, losing hope. Bring them back in. Be patient with all of them. See that no one repays anyone evil for evil, but always seek to do good to one another and to everyone here in our community at Eastern Hills and everywhere else. And what would it look like if we started to take those characteristics on? If we encouraged one another and built one another up until all of us looked like that patient, kind, loving, compassionate, And it could affect not just the people here in this room or online that are watching, not just the people in our community, but our whole city, Aurora, Denver. This entire area could start to take on the identity of Jesus. And what would it look like if when someone was moving to Aurora, they said, hey, if you move to Aurora, you're gonna have an amazing view of the mountains and you're gonna have a great neighbor. If you move to Denver, man, those people are awesome. All they do is smoke weed and care about people. Could our city start to look more like Jesus because we're building one another up? And then when people think of Aurora, when people think of Denver, they say, man, those people are for their city. It's gonna take work, it's gonna take energy. We're gonna have to encourage one another. But it's for something specific, and we don't have a lot of time on this world. So I have one more question for you as we wrap up here. Who are you partnered with to encourage one another? Who are you partnered with to encourage one another? Because if you don't have partners, people who are actually working with you, alongside you in your life, that you can encourage and that they can encourage you, and you guys can say, how can we shift our hope from these things that keep disappointing us to Jesus? How can we grow in our faith and become people that love and serve and care for the people around us better? It is not going to happen on accident. And maybe you already know who those people are, and all you need to do this week is go have a conversation and say, how can we do this more consistently? Maybe you have some people in mind that could be good, and you need to go start that conversation with them. I hope you can do that this week, because if you don't decide beforehand, it's not going to happen automatically. And maybe you're here and you're like, Dustin, I don't have anybody like that in my life. I would love for you to come find community here at Eastern Hills. We have groups that are already doing this, that are pushing one another forward, building one another up in their faith, growing together and building stronger and stronger communities. And that is really what I want for you today. In just a minute, we're going to sing a song, and it summarizes what we've been talking about, this encouragement, that we have a God that no matter how difficult our life is, no matter how painful our situations are, no matter how far we are from him, he pursues us. And he wants to bring us into his family and give us hope that never fades. And no matter how many people there are around us in the world, he wants to do the same thing for them. So would you just reflect as we sing together this next song on how great our God is, and that he died for you to give you a hope that is so much deeper than just cotton candy encouragement. I'm gonna pray for us, and then we'll sing together. Jesus, thank you for this community. Thank you for these people in this room and online that have such a deep heart and passion for you. I pray that you would draw out all of our spiritual bucket lists and show us the impact we can have on the people around us if we'll work together and encourage one another and grow together. Make us a community that is known for their love and for their acceptance and for their service and for their encouragement. Jesus, we love you so much. Amen. If you're in the room, you can stand and sing with us.